The Wolfman, Universal's classic character of a mild-mannered man who transforms into a bloodthirsty wolf by the light of the full moon. Ted Bundy, charming and ambitious law student who becomes one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. Two uncontrollable rampages by two monsters in different worlds. But are they closer than we think? Ted Bundy was born Theodore Robert Cowell in 1946 at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers in Burlington, Vermont, to Eleanor Louise Cowell. The identity of his biological father has long been the subject of speculation, ranging from a deadbeat serviceman to his own grandfather. But to this day, the question remains unanswered. Raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania until the age of 3, young Ted was initially led to believe that his maternal grandparents were, in fact, his parents, and his birth mother was his older sister. As with most ruses of this kind, the truth would eventually be outed, although the exact details of Ted's discovery remained shrouded in contradiction and mystery. He alternately stated he was told by a family member who teased him for being a bastard, and uncovered the facts on his own when he looked up his Vermont birth records. And while this unfortunate episode alone certainly couldn't have transformed an intelligent young man into the raving monster he's credited with becoming, it did precipitate a simmering hatred of a disingenuous mother, and perhaps of women in general. The truth about Bundy's childhood with his grandparents has also been open to much debate, with Ted both expressing respect for his grandfather, Samuel Cowell, and at other times detailing the man's unpredictable and tyrannical fits of rage against the family. There may have been some truth to the latter description, as Ted's mother would soon change her last name to Nelson and take Ted by the age of 4 to live with other relatives in Tacoma, Washington. It was here that Louise would attend a church function and meet a local cook named Johnny Culpepper Bundy. The pair began dating and soon married, with Johnny legally adopting Ted as his own. In this sudden new life, young Ted retreated into his own world, and although Johnny would try to include the boy in family activities and form some semblance of a father-son bond, Ted kept him at arm's length, unwilling or unable to regard the man as dad. As with so many other details of his early life, Ted Bundy's tales of growing up in Washington often contradicted what others would recall of him, and other times clashed with his own shifting accounts. He alternately relayed episodes of drinking alcohol and perusing violent, sexually explicit detective magazines as a youngster, and being repulsed by the same. And while he described feeling like an outsider and a loner, classmates remembered him as likable and popular. There are, however, a couple of irrefutable details of Ted's teenage years that leave a dark smudge on an otherwise average American upbringing. He was arrested on separate occasions for burglary and theft, respectively, with the official account of these episodes having been expunged from his record when the juvenile turned 18. And so, the wheels were set in motion. After a bit of early upheaval, young Ted Bundy had all the basic resources an average boy could expect: a family, friends, and an education. And yet, something was wrong. A part of him had come unglued somewhere along the way. That fissure would only widen as he grew to adulthood, and the horrors that would take shape in the vacuum of Ted's mind and eventually be unleashed upon the world would be unimaginable. To examine the character and story of the Wolfman, one could first look back to the earliest days of recorded history and the beginnings of popular European folklore, wherein a man could find himself afflicted with the curse of transforming into a beast, most commonly a wolf, in a condition regarded as lycanthropy. Both early Greek and Roman civilizations show evidence of lycanthropic leanings, with various man-into-wolf works of art and recorded fables. The lore of the werewolf and growing fear of the condition rose at the same time as that of the witch. So much so that in the early 1500s, in what would eventually become Switzerland, suspected werewolves were apprehended, sent to trial, and if found guilty, executed. These superstition-based judicial practices would continue unabated until the 18th century, when presumably human beings had evolved to the point where they knew better than to sentence and kill someone for the decidedly anti-Christian crime of supernatural shape-shifting. Nevertheless, just as occurred with all the women who fell to unprovable accusations of witchery, countless innocents would lose their lives at the whims of hysterical, lycanthropic fearmongers. One of the world's most infamous cases on historical record is that of Germany's Peter Stump, also known as the Werewolf of Bedburg. Stump was a farmer, landowner, and like Ted Bundy centuries later, accused serial killer. But whereas the evidence against Bundy would be irrefutable, the truth about Stump's actual guilt or innocence is permanently clouded by lost or incomplete records and the steady onward march of time. What is clear is that Peter Stump suffered one of the most ghastly and barbaric executions ever detailed in the annals of history. Following a particularly torturous interrogation, the farmer admitted to owning a magical belt bestowed upon him by the devil himself. When strapped around his waist, he said, the belt gave him the power to transform into a gigantic, bloodthirsty wolf that could prowl the countryside by night, slaughtering anything and anyone in encounter, men, women, and children included. Stump's was a detailed confession, full of salacious and unsavory details, like ripping and eating the warm fetuses from the wombs of their mothers, and specific enough to whip the public, and Stump's accusers, into a frenzy of righteous indignation. After strangling his teenage daughter before his eyes for alleged crimes of incest, Stump was tied to a wheel, his limbs broken to prevent his eventual return from the dead, and then skinned alive and beheaded before a rabid crowd. And to warn others against engaging in illicit sexual practices, consorting with the devil, or transforming into murderous wolves. Authorities hoisted the execution wheel high above the town square, with Peter Stump's decapitated head mounted atop it, like the trophy it was. Perhaps unsurprisingly in those early times, many individuals who boasted assets of either land, money, influence, or all three, found themselves at odds with the Christian Church. First maligned, and before long arrested, then tried and convicted for sometimes imaginary, often outlandish crimes. These frequently innocent citizens would pay the ultimate price, simply for being out of step with the powers that be of their day. By 1967, with those teenage brushes with the law behind him, Ted Bundy was studying language at the University of Washington and dating a student named Diane Edwards. While it appeared Bundy was getting serious about the girl, the feeling wasn't quite mutual. When he dropped out of college a year later to work a series of menial jobs, Diane felt their relationship had reached a dead end and decided to dump the young man, questioning his life's ambitions. Blindsided and heartbroken, Ted Bundy hit the road, traveling through Colorado and visiting relatives in other states, before staying put for a semester at Philadelphia's Temple University. It's unknown whether or not Bundy got what he needed from his meandering road trip, but what is known is that the road led him back to Washington by the end of 1969. The next woman in Bundy's life would stick around considerably longer than Diane Edwards, but the skies would be stormy and the ride bumpy, to say the least. Elizabeth Klepfer was a divorced secretary at the University of Washington when she met and fell in love with the charmer Bundy. Having seemingly corrected his past aimlessness, no one could question his ambition as the psych major and honor student regularly impressed his professors while putting in hours for Seattle's Suicide Hotline Crisis Center. Bundy graduated college with honors in 1972, promptly segueing into political work for figures in Washington's Republican Party. By many accounts, he was earnest, dependable, and likable. The popular consensus was that Ted was on the cusp of shining in any career of his choosing. It was a description that would dog Bundy for the rest of his abbreviated life. The bright and talented young man who could have had the world at his fingertips, if only he'd chosen a different path. The handsome and magnetic firebrand who might have become a household name if he'd only gone toward the light. But he didn't. The world would still know his name, but for all the wrong reasons. Regardless of his social or intellectual abilities and outward appearances, Ted Bundy was poised to nosedive straight into the darkness. Much like Ted Bundy, who'd graduated college into adulthood wearing a duplicitous mask of normalcy that would soon be stripped for all to see, the poor souls accused of lycanthropy in early civilizations had a tough time under the thumb of the authorities who ruled the day. By the 17th century, England's King James, himself a prolific prosecutor of witchcraft, offered a small ray of light to those regarded as shape-shifting man-eaters, when he publicly stated that accused werewolves were merely suffering from mental illness sparked by, quote, a natural superabundance of melancholic, which was basically a fancy way of saying these were depressed folks experiencing mood swings. Indeed, by today's standards, James I was far ahead of his time, and the stance endures as one of the earliest examples of human logic trumping superstitious mania. Following the king's proclamation, public views slowly but surely began to change, and soon, Diderot's encyclopedia officially regarded lycanthropy as a, quote, disorder of the brain. That didn't stop all people from sounding werewolf alarms, however, as evidenced by the curious case of the Beast of Gévaudan. For a period of 3 years in the south of France, the Beast was reported to have killed some 80 men, women, and children who'd been unfortunate enough to cross its path. Even now, centuries later, it remains unclear whether tales of the Beast could, or should, have been attributed to the work of a supernatural creature, a wild animal, or a serial killer. Some historical researchers have said that the wolf's inclusion in early supernatural lore and transformation into a sinister agent of the devil to stalk God-fearing people's nightmares was indicative of its position as the era's most dreaded natural predator. The opinion also exists that serial murders were, at times, satisfactorily explained and successfully prosecuted on the premise of werewolf legend. Just as the alleged proof of a werewolf's existence had notoriously loose rules, so too did the traits that supposedly defined the creature. Some explanations held that having eyebrows that met in the middle was a telltale sign, while others described low-set ears, a loping stride, bristly tongue, or fur visible beneath the skin as conditions that could all give the beast away. By such far-fetched logic, one may easily have added unclipped fingernails, unkempt hair, crooked teeth, and bags under the eyes to that list, and half the medieval age's population could have easily ended up hanging from the gallows. Outlandish as the criteria for werewolves may have been over the centuries, one thing remains painfully accurate, and that is man's duplicity and inhumanity to his fellow man, something Ted Bundy knew and hid well, if only for a short period of time. (1974). In the Pacific Northwest, young women had begun to go missing. Meanwhile, lapsed law student Ted Bundy was missing more and more classes, until eventually not showing up at all. It was the dawn of a one-man wave of terror that would claim more young lives than anyone at the time dreamt possible. The exact time and place of Bundy's first murder remains unknown, as his penchant for telling different stories to different people has hopelessly muddled a true chronology of the events. A studied conjecture generally places the first crime somewhere between 1969 and 1971, with the victim's identity unknown. But those who were close to Bundy have stated their belief that he may have started killing as far back as his teens. What is known is that Bundy invaded UW student Karen Sparks' apartment in the midnight hour of January 4th, 1974, and proceeded to beat her unconscious and sexually assault her with a metal rod. Sparks lived, but the attack would leave the girl with severe and lifelong disabilities. The episode seemed to ignite the bloodlust in Ted Bundy, who less than a month later would break into another student's apartment, this time with even more tragic results. Linda Ann Healy was another unsuspecting UW undergrad who broadcast regular weather reports for skiers. After surprising her at home and beating her unconscious, Bundy clothed her body and hauled her off into the night. Healy would never be seen alive again. The floodgates now open wide. Female college students began vanishing almost once a month. Donna Manson, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Parks, Brenda Ball, and Georgianne Hawkins were just some of the women who fell prey to the unseen beast who prowled the night. Meanwhile, reports of a dark-haired man driving a tan Volkswagen Beetle, alternately on crutches and with his arm in a cast, began circulating. As the surrounding campuses were becoming deadly hunting grounds, Ted Bundy was working as the assistant director of the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Commission, where he wrote a rape prevention newsletter. He later worked for the Department of Emergency Services, which helped organize searches for the missing women. While both Washington and Oregon states were buzzing with press on the flurry of abductions, police remained hesitant to release what scarce details they were able to glean from the crime scenes. Among them, the by now common sightings of the man in the tan Volkswagen, for fear of scaring off their perpetrator or causing him to change his modus operandi. Perhaps Bundy's most brazen episode occurred that July, when he abducted two separate women in one afternoon from Issaquah's Lake Sammamish State Park. Janice Ott and Denise Nasland both disappeared from the crowded park in broad daylight, in full view of witnesses, who again described a man with a sling, driving a tan Beetle. Bundy's account of that afternoon would prove as unreliable as many of his other confessions, alternately revealing how he'd subdued both women and forced one to watch him kill the other, or curiously denying the entire thing. Armed with enough mounting information to finally release to the press, police publicly detailed a dark-haired man who introduced himself as Ted, driving a tan Volkswagen Beetle, spotted and or spoken to near multiple crime scenes. Tragically, such specific details would initially fall on deaf ears. When an ex-girlfriend, two co-workers, and a college professor all reported the possibility of the man's identity being that of Seattle's Ted Bundy, police, already swamped with calls, decided the clean-cut law student with the clear record couldn't possibly be their man and disregarded the tips. The oversight would prove fatal for more young women, as a savage monster was allowed to roam free and kill again. After morphing throughout the centuries to align with the fears, superstitions, and agendas of the prevailing societal structures of the day, the werewolf really came into its own with the advent of European Gothic literature in the 18th century. In Marryat's The Phantom Ship, published in 1839, readers are treated to a segment titled The White Wolf of the Hartz Mountains, wherein a female character shapeshifts from a woman into a wolf. And the popular fairy tale Little Red Riding Hood has been interpreted by more than a few discerning readers as a slightly tweaked werewolf story. Early werewolf fiction was rife with erotic undercurrents, both metaphoric and overt, with man's animalistic urges, motivations, and transformations being thinly veiled comments on the human sexual urge. But just as every era evolves, so too does the art that reflects it. When Universal Pictures produced their classic The Wolfman in 1941 for the commercial Hollywood landscape, its filmmakers were very conscious to present their antagonists' motives as hungry, not horny. Sure, it was the entertainment business, but the rules and mores of the day were still relatively rigid and anti-taboo. To illustrate this, it would be nearly 20 years before audiences were scandalized by the sight and sound of a flushing toilet in Alfred Hitchcock's horror benchmark, Psycho. Held under a thematic microscope, The Wolfman's plot contains some intriguing mirror reflections of Ted Bundy's life and movements. When mild-mannered Larry Talbot, played by Lon Chaney Jr., returns to his sprawling family estate and reunites with his estranged father, it could be viewed as the meeting with his biological father that Ted Bundy never had. Talbot goes on to fall head over heels for a local antique shop owner named Gwen, in a curious parallel of the ultimately doomed love affair between Ted Bundy and Liz Klepfer. Charmed and taken by the magnetic stranger, Gwen unwittingly imperils herself by getting too close to the tortured Talbot, whose uncontrollable alter ego emerges to wreak bloody mayhem when the sun goes down. As witty, engaging, and sympathetic as he is by day, Chaney's Talbot is helpless against his newfound savage urges, and soon transforms into a wild and insatiable beast by night, when he hunts and slaughters several innocent locals. Where the tragedy of Larry Talbot differs from that of Ted Bundy lies in each man's reaction to his own evil deeds. Slowly realizing what he's become and what he's done, Larry Talbot is horrified and beside himself with grief. For his part, Ted Bundy knew full well what he was doing and exhibited no guilt, no shame, and no desire to stop. In fact, once in motion, his one-man murder spree only gained more and more frightening momentum, claiming a shocking number of young women's lives before it would all be over.
Design or intent to effect the death of said Lisa Levy.
My chance to talk to the press.
Contrary to Section 78204 Florida statute.
I'll plead not guilty right now.
And your grand jury...
Knowing he could never do it on his own, and desperate to prevent more needless death, Larry Talbot implores his father to lock him up before the next full moon. Skeptical, the older Talbot agrees, but his efforts are in vain. When the moon rises, Larry transforms and escapes to run wild, eventually attacking Gwen, before being killed by his own father. Sadly, there would be no such hero to interrupt Ted Bundy's murderous frenzy and put an end to the horror. No silver-tipped cane or bullet to fell the monster at the last second before it takes another life. A disparate gang of police and profilers from different states, and an ongoing series of missteps by an increasingly impulsive and careless killer are what would ultimately bring Ted Bundy down. But first, many more women, and before long, children, would die. By the end of 1974, Ted Bundy had relocated to Salt Lake City to resume his law studies at the University of Utah Law School. But things quickly went downhill, with Ted later claiming that he simply couldn't comprehend his classes, and that other students appeared to possess some level of intellect that he did not. This realization shamed and demoralized Bundy, and may very well have fed the homicidal fires that erupted a month later, when teenage girls began vanishing in and around Salt Lake. But when Bundy approached 18-year-old Carol Duranche, identifying himself as a police officer and requesting that she accompany him to the precinct to deal with an attempted theft, the madman finally met his match. Initially believing the man who identified himself as Officer Roseland, Carol quickly realized they weren't headed to the police station and struggled with Bundy, who apparently was not used to girls putting up a fight. Attempting to handcuff the teen, Bundy slipped up and slapped both cuffs on the same wrist, allowing the girl to open the car door and flee. Enter Bundy's on-again, off-again girlfriend Liz Klepfer yet again, who, upon hearing the news of missing Utah girls, reported Ted twice more to Salt Lake City detectives in late 1974, succeeding in getting his name added to their list of possible suspects. Apparently with nerves of steel, she also made arrangements to visit Salt Lake and see Ted in the near future. He readily agreed, oblivious to the fact that she'd been regularly reporting him to authorities, almost since the abductions began. As with the wolf whose hunting ground has become exhausted by overkill, Ted Bundy expanded his territory in 1975. Arriving in Colorado with a vengeance. Reinvigorated, he would abduct, rape, murder, and mutilate Karen Campbell, Julie Cunningham, Denise Oliverson, and 12-year-old Lynette Dawn Culver, before returning to Utah to claim Brigham Young co-ed Susan Curtis. During this period, Bundy was involved with 3 women simultaneously, as Liz Klepfer, Carol Ann Boone, and a fellow law student all unknowingly shared a piece of the psychopathic killer. Meanwhile, back in Washington, in the days before computers ruled the world, homicide detectives had begun thinking outside the box. With the help of a county payroll computer, they began organizing lists of thousands of suspects, cross-referencing information from eyewitnesses, tips, and prior offenses. Their improvised methods would pay off, as Ted Bundy's name appeared on every list compiled, and soon, that name would set off alarm bells with news of his arrest coming out of Utah. As the duplicitous Ted Bundy rampaged from state to state, so too did the werewolf rampage from screen to screen, getting a big boost and gaining momentum after the worldwide success of Universal's The Wolfman, which saw the creature join in the pop culture monster pantheon and carve out an eternal spot on the Universal Monsters' Mount Rushmore of horror. The Wolfman would yield 4 direct sequels, and while none matched the impact or quality of the original, they did serve to profit the studio, which was still riding high on its monster series, and keep the beast in the public eye. Werewolf action figures, comic books, cartoons, Halloween costumes, and myriad creative opportunities all followed, generating an omnipresent merchandising industry around the man-to-beast character that would see peaks and valleys, but never stay down for long. When Universal eventually remade its classic The Wolfman in 2010, starring Benicio del Toro and Anthony Hopkins, the film crafted new and unique werewolf howls, using sound bites from rock stars Gene Simmons of Kiss and Van Halen's David Lee Roth, among others. The film sticks somewhat close to the established formula set by its predecessor. If viewers were once again hungry for bloodthirsty shapeshifting, the WOLFMAN remake delivered a good deal of furry-fanged fun. One cold-blooded killer whom profilers had sussed out as being at least somewhat discerning was Ted Bundy. Though his striking distance was ever widening, his choice of prey remained to a large degree fixed. Pretty young women, often college-aged, with dark hair parted in the middle. By late 1975, the detail had begun to circulate, prompting some women to alter their hairstyles in an extra attempt at safety. Years later, Bundy would state that his only criteria was that he found a victim attractive, and that long hair parted in the middle was nothing more than the prevailing style of the times. On the prowl in the early morning hours of August 16th, Bundy cased a quiet neighborhood in his car, and upon encountering a police cruiser, fled at high speed. It was the antithesis of the calculating and cool killer he'd become, and a very bad move. But for authorities, it was the lucky break they had been desperately seeking. Upon searching Ted's Volkswagen, police discovered what became known in profiling circles as a kill kit. Recognizing his name from previous tips and witness descriptions, police were keen to put Bundy under a microscope. However, without enough evidence to bring charges, they were forced to release him. Ted Bundy walked out the police station's door with a smile. It was as close a call as could be had, but instead of backing off and laying low, he remained in plain sight, though perhaps not quite as confident.
After Sergeant Hayward had searched my car and called in another officer to come in, and after my car had been thoroughly searched by the other officers, Detective Andract approached me at that time and informed me that he was going to seize certain items from my car.
Not about to let him off their radar, police placed Bundy on round-the-clock surveillance. For a free-roaming, compulsive killer like Ted Bundy, it was a difficult spot to be in. What would be even tougher was what Liz Klepfer told detectives when they finally came to interview her in depth about her history with Ted. He possessed various peculiar items, including a lug wrench with a taped handle, a meat cleaver that was never utilized in the kitchen, a pair of crutches with plaster of Paris used for making casts, and an inexplicable bag of women's clothing. In casual conversation, he once threatened to break her neck. Feeling the heat, Bundy made the suspicious move of selling his Volkswagen to a local teenager. Police watched the transaction from afar, then swooped in and impounded the car, searching it with a fine-toothed comb. These were the days before DNA, but authorities did discover hairs that matched strands collected from 3 confirmed victims. Subsequently identified in a police lineup by multiple eyewitnesses from multiple crime scenes, Ted Bundy was arrested and charged with kidnapping and assault. When bail was paid by his mother and stepfather, he absconded to Seattle, where he moved in with Liz Klepfer, still unaware of the lengths to which she'd gone to aid the authorities, who were by then singling him out as their #1 suspect. For being able to fall asleep beside Ted Bundy night after night, Liz could certainly lay claim to a rare kind of bravery. Indeed, her cooperation would be clutch for police, who, although he would escape custody, would never again allow Ted Bundy to escape their crosshairs. When detectives from Washington, Utah, and Colorado convened in Aspen to compare information with authorities from 5 other states, in a gathering that was known as the Aspen Summit, everyone present agreed that Ted Bundy was the offender they sought. Sentenced to Utah State Prison for kidnapping, then transferred to Colorado to stand trial for murder. It looked as if Bundy's luck had finally run out, but as with the case of the affable Larry Talbot, who became a flesh-rending monster by night, looks could be deceiving. In 1974, while Ted Bundy was still lurking under the radar, stalking and brutalizing innocent women in America, producers in England released an intriguing and lasting Little Werewolf film. Adapted from a short story titled There Shall Be No Darkness, The Beast Must Die co-stars horror legend Peter Cushing and concerns a millionaire who invites a collection of disparate characters to his sprawling estate in order to reveal one of them as a werewolf and destroy them. Just as authorities narrowed down suspects and followed up on leads in their exhaustive search for the faceless killer terrorizing a growing number of states, so did the character of Tom Newcliffe gather and sequester his top suspects in a treacherous game of whodunit. Like the Utah police who trailed Ted Bundy like his own shadow, Newcliffe's guests find themselves under constant surveillance, like bugs under glass, with cameras and motion detectors recording their every move. The deck is stacked, and the game is rigged, and whichever guest is the werewolf will have no place to run and no place to hide. Just as Ted Bundy seemingly took his victims at will, whenever and wherever the urge struck, so does The Beast Must Die's mystery werewolf claim a victim from right under its host's watchful eye. Newcliffe's partner Pavel, who notably doesn't believe in werewolves, is the first to die. This plot point makes one wonder how many of Bundy's victims had seen the alarming reports of abductions, but chose to disregard the news as misfortune that couldn't, or wouldn't, happen to them. After Pavel's demise, more victims follow, and the trapped houseguests quickly find themselves lined up for the slaughter. And as Ted Bundy would soon prove at a Colorado courthouse crawling with cops, when we think we've got a monster right where we want them, is sometimes when they're more dangerous than ever. With Bundy making the choice to represent himself in his first murder trial, the judge legally exempted him from being handcuffed or shackled in court. It was a decision that would soon come back to bite. Receiving permission to visit the courthouse library and work on his case, Bundy casually opened an unlocked window and leapt from the second story. Authorities had finally found their fiend and brought him to trial, but then, just like that, he was gone. With police scrambling to find him, Bundy strolled through Aspen like a wolf perusing henhouses and disappeared into the mountains, where he promptly got lost. Wandering for days, he survived by breaking into unoccupied cabins and trailers, pilfering food and clothing from each. Eventually making his way back into Aspen, despite the search parties that were actively combing the area, Bundy stole a car and was quickly pulled over for his bad driving. He'd been on the lam for less than a week. With Bundy back in custody, the authorities and community breathed a collective sigh of relief. But like a cornered wolf that knows its only two choices are fight or flight, Ted had no intentions of leaving his fate to the courts. Convincing a girlfriend to smuggle him money, he set about a devious new plan of escape. Armed with a hacksaw and blueprints, he cut a hole in the ceiling of his cell and waited for the upcoming Christmas holiday, when the jail would be low on manpower. While most staff were home with their families, Ted Bundy was snaking through the ceiling into the head guard's quarters, changing into street clothes, and strolling right out the front door into the night. Wily beyond belief, the fugitive Bundy stole another car. Also cursed with abysmal luck, the car would break down before he could escape the area. Not to be deterred, Bundy hitchhiked some 60 miles, catching a bus to Denver, and then hopping on a flight. By the time authorities realized their star prisoner was gone on New Year's Eve, Ted Bundy was on the loose in Chicago. Daring escapes are something of a theme throughout several of history's werewolf films. In Universal's Wolfman remake, an imprisoned Lawrence Talbot transforms and slaughters his handlers, before escaping to terrorize the streets of London. In the 1981 classic, The Howling, the character of Eddie Quist is a serial killer who rises from the dead after being shot by police, escaping the city morgue to stalk the residents of a remote wooded retreat. Just as the name Ted Bundy invokes unfathomably numerous and shockingly depraved sex murders, so does mention of the Wolfman conjure salacious images of man turning into ravenous beast, usually painfully. The causes and specifics of shapeshifting from man into animal varies from century to century, continent to continent, and story to story. In some tellings, a magical belt facilitates the power. In others, a gypsy's curse does the trick. And perhaps most popularly, as with vampire legend, the bite of a werewolf is a surefire way to create a werewolf. Over the years, steady improvements in on-screen special effects, from simple camera tricks like layered frames and time-lapse, to prosthetic applications and character animatronics, to elaborate computer generation, have all made it possible for audiences to experience more realistic and frightening werewolf transformations. This has ultimately turned the werewolf movie's bread and butter, the transformation scene, into an attraction all its own. Often, werewolf films reach a narrative point where the authorities, having become surrogates for the angry mob that historically forms to hunt down the bloodthirsty beast, find, corner, and kill the monster. Usually, as a distraught loved one looks on, helpless. This also holds true for American Werewolf's lead character David, who, after going on a practically de rigueur public rampage, is gunned down by police in front of his weeping girlfriend. But, in fantasy, as in real life, the monster may be vanquished, but its unfathomable trail of damage has been done. As with the werewolf, capture or death were the only two final scenarios that hovered ever closer to fugitive Ted Bundy, as he utilized planes, trains, and stolen automobiles to wind his way across the country to Florida, where his unparalleled murder spree would at last reach its grim conclusion. Calling himself Chris Hagen, Bundy rented a room near the FSU campus and resolved to lay low and live under the radar for as long as possible. But when a prospective employer asked him to submit the required identification, his plans went up in smoke. Before long, thievery once again became Bundy's main means of getting by, and, as a surprise to no one, his murderous urges swelled again. Only a few days into his Florida stay, that urge would be satisfied when Bundy broke into the Chi Omega sorority house and brutally murdered Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy before embarking on a violent rampage through the streets that could match or beat any werewolf tale ever told. Consumed with bloodlust, Bundy savagely attacked Kathy Kleiner, Karen Chandler, and Cheryl Thomas. All three women would survive, but suffer beatings so severe they'd be left with missing teeth, broken jaws, crushed bones, and deep lacerations. Despite his diabolical frenzy, Ted Bundy still wasn't done. In Jacksonville, he attempted to lure a 14-year-old from a parking lot, abandoning the attempt when the girl's older brother appeared. His choice of prey had suddenly skewed younger, a relatively uncommon occurrence for killers who display a preferred type. And sadly, 12-year-old Kimberly Leach would not have a guardian angel waiting in the wings to ward off the monster. Vanishing into thin air after being summoned by her homeroom teacher to a classroom, the girl's body would later be found, raped and murdered, in a pig barn. But if there were any silver lining, or silver bullet, to be found, Kimberly Leach would be Ted Bundy's final victim. Unable to pay his rent and increasingly paranoid about the police, Bundy stole yet another car to escape Tallahassee. With such a successful track record of commandeering other people's vehicles, perhaps Ted Bundy should have pursued a career as a repo man. Alas, driving is where he always seemed to get himself into trouble. After a Pensacola patrol officer ran the license plate and discovered the car stolen, the sand in Bundy's hourglass of luck finally ran out. While being arrested, Ted ran for it, but to no avail. After a foot chase, Bundy was tackled, overpowered, and taken into custody for the final time. Inside his car, police found a pile of young women's college IDs, stolen credit cards, and disguises. En route to the police station, Bundy is reported to have told his arresting officer,
"I wish you'd killed me.
What? What'd you say?
I wish you'd killed me."
Did Ted Bundy want to die? Probably not in the drawn-out, see-it-coming-like-a-slow-freight-train way that happens on death row. But one could easily view his snowballing mania and combative reaction to arrest as flagrantly unspoken challenges. Stop me if you can, because I can't stop myself. It's all oddly similar to The Wolfman. And years later, when Bundy stood facing the killer that would take his own life, the infamous Florida electric chair, Old Sparky. Eyeing the eyewitnesses gathered on the other side of the death chamber glass, Ted Bundy calmly uttered, "It's all right." The issue of man's duality looms large in the stories of Ted Bundy and the Wolfman alike. As the character of John Talbot says regarding werewolf legend,
Now, others of us find that good, bad, right, wrong are many-sided, complex things. We try to see every side, but the more we see, the less sure we are. Now, you ask me if I believe a man can become a wolf. If you mean, can he take on the physical characteristics of an animal? No, it's fantastic. However, I do believe that most anything can happen to a man in his own mind.
the observation could easily be saying as much about Ted Bundy as the curse of lycanthropy itself. Most tellings of werewolfery involve a final frenzied rampage that invariably facilitates the story's conclusion, wherein the man-beast falls to the appointed heroes, and all is set right with the world. And so it was for Ted Bundy, who, having murdered still untold numbers of young women, and gone berserk by the light of the full moon in a sorority house in its surrounding neighborhood, was at last brought to justice to stand trial in Miami. Reporters from around the globe were on hand to cover the event, which had the dubious distinction of being the first nationally televised trial in America. A nation that would soon be redrawn, with the help of cable television and then the internet, in the image of a salacious, scandal-starved circus. Bundy was, of course, found guilty at his trial's conclusion, and began racking up the death sentences that would eventually bring a shocking end to his equally shocking life. And in the same way the Wolfman's John Talbot felt conflicted when it came time to deliver the death blow to his son Larry, so too did trial judge Edward Cowart proclaim, in peculiarly bald-faced admiration of a serial killer.
The court finds that both of these killings were indeed heinous, atrocious, and cruel, in that they were extremely wicked, shockingly evil, vile, and the product of a design to inflict a high degree of pain and utter indifference to human life. This court, independent of, but in agreement with, the advisory sentence rendered by the jury, does hereby impose the death penalty upon the defendant Theodore Robert Bundy. Take care of yourself, young man.
Thank you.
I say that to you sincerely. Take care of yourself. It's a tragedy for this court to see it's such a total waste, I think, of humanity that I've experienced in this court. You're a bright young man. If you made a good lawyer, I'd love to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner. Take care of yourself. I don't have any animosity to you. I want you to know that.
For several years, Ted Bundy fought his death sentences with appeal after appeal, using the books to delay the inevitable with all the cunning and guile he displayed when he was on the loose. But the law affords every man only so much rope before it's time to hang. And on a stark winter morning in 1989, Bundy's day finally came.
An unprecedented crowd of hundreds started gathering before dawn. It took on a macabre circus-like atmosphere.
Is this what you expected to find when you come out here? Folks dancing and singing?
Yeah, why not?
But a handful of anti-death penalty protesters.
It sounds more like vengeance to me than justice.
At one point, the celebration got out of hand. One man was arrested for shooting off fireworks. Until the very last moment, no one could be sure Bundy didn't have a last trick up his sleeve, a legal technicality. But in the death chamber, Bundy was uttering his final words. So it ended for Ted Bundy. 10 years, 28 confessions, millions in Florida's legal battle to end his life. Warren Ellie, Pulse 13, Florida State Prison.
It's not a stretch to assume that Ted Bundy believed he was invincible, as he proved to be to the dozens of young women he brutalized and butchered, and for a time, in the face of the penal system itself.
Gentlemen, I'm not going to be paraded to Mr. Casares and best.
Step out, Mr. Bundy.
What do we have here, Ken? Let's see. Oh, it's an indictment, all right? Why don't you read it to me? You're up for election, aren't you?
Mr. Bundy.
You got it, didn't you?
Mr. Bundy.
You told him that you were going to get me. He said he was going to get me, okay? You've got the indictment. It's all you're going to get. Let's read it. Let's go.
Theodore Robert Bundy, you are charged, indictment, 2 counts burglary and 2 counts murder in the first degree, 3 counts attempted murder in the first degree. In the name of and by the authority of the state of Florida, the grand jurors of the state of Florida impaneled and sworn to inquire and true presentment make in and for the county of Leon upon their oaths do present that Theodore Robert Bundy on the 15th day of January 1978 in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully enter or remain in a structure located at 661 West Jefferson Street, the dwelling of Karen Chandler and or Kathy Kleiner with the intent to commit the offense of battery therein. In the course of committing such burglary, the said Theodore Robert Bundy did make an assault upon Karen Chandler and or Kathy Kleiner, contrary to section 81002 Florida statutes.
Very good.
And your grand jurors being present in said court further gives the court to be informed and understand that Theodore Robert Bundy on the 15th day of January 1978 in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully kill a human being, to wit, Margaret Bowman, by strangling and or beating her, and said killing was perpetrated by said Theodore Robert Bundy from or with a premeditated design or intent to effect the death of said Margaret Bowman, contrary to section 78204 Florida statutes.
My chance to talk to the press.
Contrary to section 78204 Florida statutes.
I'll plead not guilty right now.
And your grand jurors being present in said court further gives the court to be informed and understand that Theodore Robert Bundy on the 15th day of January in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully attempt to kill a human being, to wit, Karen Chandler, by beating her about the head and knowingly or intentionally causing great bodily harm. I think that...
Well, listen, I've been kept in isolation for 6 months. I've been kept away from the press. I've been buried by you. You've been talking for 6 months. I think it's my turn now. All right?
We got a court order that there won't be any press here.
Sure there won't be any press interviews. You've given them out. I'm gagged, you're not.
Okay. Captain
All right.
will read your
I'll
right.
be heard.
When in The Wolfman, Dr. Lloyd comments,
I believe that a man lost in the mazes of his mind may imagine that he's anything.
It could easily apply to Bundy behind bars, poring over the law books to find new loopholes to slip through, just as he slipped through that hole in the ceiling so many years before. But on January 24th, 1989, there would be no more loopholes, no more holes in ceilings, no more open windows to freedom. Ted Bundy had tried most everything during his time in prison. He'd married a poor believer named Carol Boone, sired a daughter, assisted the authorities in profiling the notorious Green River Killer, aided other condemned inmates with their cases, and finally, confessed to all his crimes.
For the record, you are guilty of killing many women and girls. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
Ted, how did it happen?
As young boys do, we explored the back roads and sideways and byways of our neighborhood, and oftentimes people would dump the garbage and whatever they were cleaning out of their house, and from time to time we'd come across pornographic books of a harder nature than more graphic, you might say, more explicit nature than we would encounter, let's say, in your local grocery store. In
in the beginning it fuels this kind of thought process. Then at a certain time it's instrumental in what I would say crystallizing it, making it into something which is almost like a separate entity inside. And at that point you're at the verge, or I was at the verge of acting out on these kinds of thoughts.
Now I really want to understand that.
And it happens. It happened in stages, gradually. It doesn't necessarily, not to me at least, happen overnight. Just even to think of it is wrong, but certainly to do it is wrong. And I'm on that edge, and you might say the last vestiges of restraint, the barriers to actually doing something were being tested constantly. The sensation, of reaching that point where I knew that it was like something had, say, snapped, that I knew that I couldn't control it anymore, that these barriers that I had learned as a child, that had been instilled in me, were not enough to hold me back with respect to seeking out and harming somebody.
At 7 a.m. on January 24th, 1989, Ted Bundy was led to the execution chamber. Afterward, when Bundy's body was driven out in a white hearse to the cheers of a celebratory crowd, one thing was clear. The mob had finally gotten their monster, and the feared werewolf was dead. More than 30 years after his execution, there's never been another serial killer quite like Ted Bundy. And if the world is lucky, there never will be again. Utterly soulless, devoid of reason, compassion, and any moral compass whatsoever. A hollow and destructive vessel in the shape of an average man. Intelligent monster, violent gentleman. Both Larry Talbot and Ted Bundy wrestled with alter egos and hidden urges that erupted on the world around them, resulting in horrifying mayhem. These dichotomies would lead both men to their graves, but not before their worst impulses claimed too many innocent victims. Ted Bundy, the Wolfman, two monsters in two different worlds. One, a legend born from superstition and nightmares. The other, a nightmarish legend that will live forever in the annals of crime and justice. And, as we've come to find out, they're closer than we think.